Hello, everyone. It's Steve with Aptera Owners Club. I want to talk a little bit more about this UAE Aptera relationship and talk about why the UAE and other Gulf countries are interested in things like the Aptera. It has to do with something called the resource curse, and what this says is that it's also called the paradox of plenty. It's an economic theory that says that countries that have a lot of natural resources tend to develop slowly and tend to have autocratic authoritarian governments which suppress their economic growth and do not reach their full potential. And the reason is they feel like if you don't have resources, what you have to develop is you have to develop your citizenry because they are the ones who pay taxes. So you have to develop the skills of your people. They then produce taxes, which then the government spends. And of course, because the people are paying the taxes, they are more likely to scrutinize the government and their spending. However, in resource-rich countries, the taxation to run the government comes from the industries. So the extractive industries that are mining the uranium or the oil or the gas or coal or whatever, they pay the taxes. The government then uses the expenditures. Citizens are not really paying the taxes directly. In fact, they are usually given a lot of benefits through the government through these taxes. So they are generally less scrutinizing of the government and the spending. And so then the government can do kind of whatever they want. It leads to a lot of corruption as well because they often hide the sources of the revenue and then they give it out to their friends and family members. And then they want to stay in power because then they can control the natural resources. And so that leads to an authoritarian government. There tends to be a lot of internal conflicts to try to control the resources and some external conflicts where another country tries to take control of the resources. And because they have a lot of natural resources, there's no incentive for them to be efficient about their spending. Now, we can make the argument that no governments are efficient about their spending, and that's probably true. But in resource-rich countries where the taxation comes from these businesses, and it seems like somewhat of in the short term seems like a large amount and an endless supply, they're even less efficient about spending, and they tend to borrow against their natural resource reserves. So these are all serious problems and leads to these countries not having good economies. And also because their economy is based on usually a single source, whatever resource they're rich in, they have boom and bust cycles based on the price of that asset. And it's a very fragile economy. And so they are well aware of this. And if you look at, let's look at the oil reserves, the 10 countries with the largest oil reserves. Number one is Venezuela. They have the largest oil reserves in the world. Venezuela is not doing well. They have a authoritarian government. They have not run their economic policy well. And the other reason that they have problems is although they have more resources, known reserves than Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia's resources are very close to the surface and on land, so very easy to access. Whereas Venezuela, most of their reserves are offshore and very deep, so very difficult to access. So although they have more, it's much pricier and costlier and more technically difficult to extract those their oil reserves. Then there's Iran, Iraq, UAE. So UAE is number 5 in terms of largest oil reserves. Kuwait, Russia, United States, Libya, Nigeria. Now, you'll see that most of these countries have problems with authoritarian governments and have an economy that is very, very dependent on their oil reserves. So Venezuela, yes. Saudi Arabia, yes. Iran, Iraq. UAE actually has done the best out of the Gulf states. They recognized this problem long ago, and their government wisely chose to diversify over a decade ago. Almost 2 decades ago, they started trying to diversify away from oil. Kuwait has a problem. Russia is essentially a petroleum state as well. They don't have much of an economy outside their petroleum. United States has such a large economy, even though we have relatively large oil reserves. It is not a big contributor to our economy. Libya and Nigeria. So you can see, yeah, these it kind of tends to hold true. On the flip side, if you look at, I'll take two countries, Switzerland. So Switzerland is a landlocked country with basically no natural resources to speak of. They don't have any significant mineral reserves or anything. Yet they're one of the most developed and has one of the highest per capita income of any country in the world. Their main industries are watches, some in high-tech manufacturing, robotics and such, and business and finance. These are all industries that don't require natural resources. They have a very highly skilled workforce, and they do quite well. Another country that does not have many resources is South Korea. South Korea does not have any petroleum reserves, does not have any significant mineral reserves, was in the 1950s had the same per capita income as Cuba, but they have diverged since then. South Korea has a very high-tech industry, and they've invested in a highly skilled workforce, much like Switzerland, and tend to have is a very developed country with pretty high standard of living. Now, getting back to the Gulf states, these Gulf states now, they do recognize that they are going to run out of oil at some point. And they do need to diversify. And they realize that their economy is based on the commodity price of oil, which is highly volatile, and that's just not a good way to be. And Bahrain and Oman are the most precarious position because their reserves are expected to run out in the next decade for Bahrain. And Bahrain, basically, their reserves have run out. There's some in there, but it gets harder and harder to extract the last bit of oil that they have. So they're basically tapped out. Oman's gonna tap out pretty soon. Within 10 years, the EV reserves are gone, and then they'll follow soon afterwards. So they realize this is a problem. And if you look at their per capita hydrocarbon reserves and net sovereign wealth, you see that Bahrain and Oman essentially have negative per capita wealth after they took on a lot of debt to finance their country and their industry. And though they have some reserves, they're negative. Kuwait, you can see they have large reserves, they have some debt. Qatar, same thing, large reserves on a per capita basis. But if you take away their debts, they're lower. And Saudi Arabia, they have large reserves, but they have a larger population. And then if you take out their debt, they essentially have not much sovereign wealth on a per capita basis. UAE is the opposite. They have very little debt. They've diversified, so they have per capita less reserves than, so for example, Kuwait and Qatar. But after their debts, they have higher net sovereign wealth. So UAE has kind of been the blueprint for them. And if you look at this, you can see that. So Bahrain, as a percentage of their thing, they're less, but their economy is very, very small. And you can see UAE is doing the best out of these countries. And here you can see their total revenues. They've dropped since 2012 to 2018. They've dropped to less than 40%. And now I think UAE hydrocarbon reserve revenues are under 20% of their economy. So they're doing quite well from that standpoint. And you see there's UAE's GDP grew by 4%, and 70% of that growth was driven by non-oil industry. So Saudi Arabia is trying to follow suit. Their sovereign investment fund invested $2 billion into Lucid, and one of their stipulations of that was for Lucid to open up a manufacturing facility in Saudi Arabia, because they don't want to just invest. They want to put the industry in the country and try to create jobs and a different kind of economy, a manufacturing economy, rather than an extractive economy. So they've done that, and they're trying to do some pretty ambitious things like, building NEOM and the line and all kinds of stuff like that. So Saudi Arabia is trying to follow behind UAE's footsteps, but UAE has done the best job so far. They have they're trying to move themselves more into a logistics and transport and banking, finance, and tourism kind of industry, and they are successfully doing that. If you look at the location of the UAE here, you can see that they are within an easy flight of the majority of the world population. Europe is very close, and Asia is very close. What's farther is the Americas are relatively farther away, but probably more than 3/4 of the world's population is within an easy flight from them. And as a shipping place, they are fairly centralized. Access to Europe through the Suez Canal and through Asia as a shipping area. So they've done quite well. And their two flag carriers, Emirates and Etihad, are very well known and desirable airlines to fly. If any of you guys have flown either of those airlines, let us know in the comments below. I haven't flown either of their airlines, but I've heard they're very good. And the last thing is that they need to try, because these countries, their extractive industries are funding their government. Most of their people work in the public sector, and the public sector is controls like 90% of the employment, which is not a good place to be. And so they need to promote private sector growth, which is one of the reasons that they would be interested in like Aptera or Lucid, because they want to move away from industries that are dependent on oil. And so they're trying to move into renewable energies, manufacturing, high tech. I think UAE has a ministry of artificial intelligence. So they're doing everything they can to move away from that, because they need to encourage real private sector growth. And this I thought was the most interesting part of this whole Brookings study that I read is these governments provide their nationals with access to public sector jobs at high wages and benefits as a means of accessing share of economic rent. This system affects the education and career choices of nationals who typically seek the minimum credentials needed to access these public sector jobs, with less concern for developing the skills needed to contribute to productive jobs in the private sector. So they're basically like, I just need to get a job working for the government, like as a secretary or mail person or something. They just want the minimum requirement because they're going to get a good job with good pay, with good benefits, good vacations, retirement, all that stuff. Healthcare is paid for and all that. And they're like, so there's not much incentive for them to work hard and work competitively. So what they're doing is they're trying to reduce the number of public sector jobs. But then what they do is, so here we go. Let's read it. They say it much better than me. Furthermore, because public salaries include a share of economic rents, the civil service salary structure is both augmented and compressed. Those at the lower end of the salary scale with the least marketable skills are paid higher premiums over private sector alternatives compared with those higher skills. These create perverse incentives in terms of sector preference, with lower skilled workers more resistant to accepting private sector work. Also, whenever states wish to increase the share of oil rents distributed to the wage structure in response to political conditions or increasing the price of oil, it results in appreciation of the wage bill that is not easily reversed. With the decline in oil revenue, public sector jobs have become scarce, and the governments have tried to transfer the responsibility for employing their people to the private sector. However, the people's sense of entitlement has transferred with them. This manifested in expectation of higher wages and benefits and a weak motivation to work. In return, private sector employers typically avoid hiring citizens unless obliged to do so. In these cases, they often treat this as a cost of doing business and do not develop the higher citizens' productive capabilities. So basically, the citizens they expect higher wages with less work, and they don't really want to work harder because that's what they've been used to, and they have this entitlement. So private sector people they usually prefer to hire expatriates, immigrants, because they work harder and they're more productive, and they'll only do so if they're compelled by the government that, hey, if you want to work here, you have to hire our citizens. And so this has resulted This breaks the link between performance and reward and creates an entitlement mentality which has persisted after oil rents have been depleted. This results in high unemployment rates amongst young nationals who queue for scarce public sector jobs despite the large supply of jobs in the private sector that are filled by expatriate workers. Youth unemployment rates among young nationals in most GCC countries with availability are high, reaching, for example, 40% in Saudi Arabia. So this is a major problem when your young citizens, they just want to, they apply for the public sector jobs, which there are very few of. There's lots of private sector jobs that they could work, but they don't want to because the pay is less. So you have basically immigrants from South Asian countries, usually India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Malaysia, and Indonesia, things like that. And they come in and work those jobs because they're willing to do those jobs for those salaries. And so then you have unemployment rates and when you have unemployment rates for young people, and then the money from the petroleum runs out, you're in a world of hurt as a government. So because of this, that's why they're investing in this. They want some higher tech industry to come in that can offer higher paying jobs. And they are trying to get, if you looked at Qatar, and especially, they've invested in a lot of money in having American universities come set up shop in their country. If you go to Doha, like Carnegie Mellon, Cornell, they have all set up schools there to basically train their citizens. And so they're kind of subsidizing their higher, so they're trying to get a higher skilled workers and diversifying. So UAE has been the most successful at it, and they're the most open to it. So I believe, this is my guess, is that Aptera has a model that they can set up. They can set up small assembly factories like the one they're setting up in Carlsbad pretty easily at various sites around the world. If they take a large investment from someone in the UAE or from the UAE, from the sovereign investment fund, one of the stipulations is you must come over and build a factory like Lucid did. And for Aptera, it's much easier because they are not vertically integrated at this point and they're assembling. And so they can pretty easily say, yeah, we can do that. And that is sort of what I'm expecting. I'm expecting them to access some funds from that region with the stipulation that they will at some point open up another factory there. And then I think, if this takes off and becomes popular in this area, then they can service this area with that factory. And there's probably going to be a factory in Europe at some point. I don't know whether it's going to be in Germany or Italy or somewhere else. And there's going to be a factory in the United States, depending on how well they do. Maybe there's going to be a second factory in the United States in the east or the south or something like that. But that is the reason why the countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE are trying to diversify. They understand that they are in a precarious position and they do need to diversify, and they are actively trying to do so. And they are doing so by investing in some higher tech companies and trying to entice them to come into their country. All right. Hopefully that gives you some context. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a great day.